Folks, this is Captain Evans. We're experiencing a minor technical issue. We're working on it now. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. A nervous murmur rippled through the cabin. A flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, with a practiced, reassuring smile, began to move down the aisle. Pauline unbuckled her belt and stood, her movements fluid and economical despite her age. She stepped into the aisle, her eyes fixed on the cockpit door. Chloe intercepted her immediately. "Ma'am, the captain asked everyone to remain seated. The port engine compressor is stalling," Pauline said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "He's losing thrust symmetry." Chloe's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. She saw an old woman, probably confused by the announcement, spouting nonsense. "Ma'am, please, the pilots are professionals. They have it under control. Let me help you back to your seat." "I need to speak to the first officer," Pauline insisted, her gaze unwavering. "That's not possible," Chloe said, her tone firming. "Now please sit down. You're making the other passengers nervous." From the front of the cabin, the cockpit door opened, and a young man in a crisp white shirt with first officer stripes on the epaulets stepped out. He looked harried, his face pale. This was Mark. "What's going on out here?" he demanded, his eyes scanning the cabin before landing on Pauline. "This passenger is a little agitated, Mark," Chloe explained, her voice a stage whisper. "She won't sit down." Mark sized Pauline up in an instant. Gray hair, bright jacket, a little frail looking, a grandmother, probably scared. He softened his expression into one of professional condescension. "Ma'am, everything is fine. My name is First Officer Jensen. Captain Evans is a little under the weather, but I've got the situation handled. Now, if you'll please return to your seat, we'll be on the ground in Vegas before you know it." "You're in a cascading failure," Pauline stated, ignoring his placating tone. "Your ECAS is probably lit up like a Christmas tree, and you're fighting a yaw you can't correct with the rudder trim alone. You need to shut down engine 1 before it seizes completely." Mark stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. It was an uncanny, terrifyingly accurate assessment. How could she possibly know that? He shook it off. A lucky guess. A retired mechanic's wife, maybe. He had to maintain control. The passengers were watching. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice tightening. "You're interfering with a flight crew, which is a federal offense. Now sit down." He turned his back on her to speak with Chloe, a clear dismissal. Pauline didn't move. She could feel the plane beginning to slew, a slow, sickening slide to the left. Mark was in over his head. The captain wasn't under the weather, he was incapacitated, and the young co-pilot was drowning. She took a step forward. "First Officer Jensen," she said, her voice cutting through the cabin's nervous quiet. "Your autopilot just disengaged, didn't it? You're hand-flying now and you're struggling. I can help you." Mark spun around, his face flushed with a mixture of fear and anger. "That's it. Chloe, call for security to meet us at the gate." "Ma'am, you are creating a disturbance. This is your final warning." He saw some passengers filming with their phones, and his panic sharpened into fury. This old woman was making him look incompetent. "You don't have time for that," Pauline said calmly. She looked past him, toward the cockpit. "Is he conscious?" "That is none of your business," Mark snapped. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. A few people screamed, an overhead bin popped open, and a bag tumbled out. Mark stumbled, catching himself on a seatback. His carefully constructed facade of control was shattering. "What was your simulator score on single-engine approaches in this airframe?" Pauline asked, her voice steady as a rock in the rising sea of chaos. "Did you practice with a crosswind component? Because you've got one at 20 knots out of the northeast, and it's about to push you into Nellis Air Force Base's restricted airspace." Mark's eyes widened. She was right. About all of it. He was 10 seconds from declaring a full-blown emergency, and he was terrified. He was losing the aircraft. The complexity of the situation, a medical emergency, a critical engine failure, and now this bizarre, omniscient old woman was overwhelming him. He looked at her, at the quiet confidence radiating from her, a stark contrast to the clattering panic in his own chest. He noticed a small tarnished silver pin on the lapel of her red jacket. It was an abstract shape like a stylized bird or a dart. "What do you know about flying?" he scoffed, a desperate last-ditch effort to reassert his authority. "What's that pin?" "Get it in a cereal box." The question hung in the air. For a fleeting second, the vibrating cabin around Pauline faded away. The scent of jet fuel and ozone filled her nostrils. She was 28 again, standing on a sun-scorched tarmac in the Mojave Desert. A grizzled, legendary flight test engineer was pinning that same silver dart to her flight suit. Her hands were scraped and bruised from fighting a prototype back to Earth after its flight control system had tried to tear the wings off. "You earned this, Sanders," he had grunted. "You brought our baby home." The pin was from the classified test pilot school, an honor given to only a handful of pilots who had demonstrated extraordinary skill and courage in the face of disaster. She snapped back to the present. The plane yawed hard left. "There's no time to explain," she said, her voice hardening. "You can have me arrested on the ground, but first you have to get us there. And right now you can't. Let me in the cockpit." Mark was frozen. Every instinct, every line in his training manual, screamed at him to refuse. But the feel of the plane, the tremor of impending catastrophe coming up through the floor, told him a different story. He was failing. It was Chloe, the flight attendant, who made the decision. Her face was ashen. She had seen Mark's panic up close. She had heard the undeniable expertise in Pauline's voice. "Mark," she whispered, her hand on his arm. "Let her try." Defeated, Mark stumbled back and gestured toward the cockpit. "Fine," he choked out, his voice barely audible. "Fine." Pauline moved past him without a word, her expression unreadable. She slipped into the cockpit and closed the door behind her. The captain was slumped in the left seat, unconscious, his face pale and beaded with sweat. The right seat, Mark's seat, was empty. The cockpit was a cacophony of alarms and flashing lights. The view through the windscreen showed the world tilted at a precarious angle. She took a deep, steadying breath and slid into the captain's seat, gently moving his legs aside. Her hands, wrinkled with age, moved with an impossible speed and precision over the complex instrument panel. She silenced the most distracting alarms, her eyes scanning the dizzying array of screens and gauges, absorbing the data with a speed that defied her years. She grabbed the yoke. The plane felt heavy, sluggish, a wounded beast. Mark stumbled in behind her, strapping himself into the first officer's seat. He watched, stunned into silence, as she began to fly the plane. Her inputs were small, precise, almost delicate. She wasn't fighting the crippled aircraft. She was guiding it, coaxing it, using the rudder pedals with an expertise he had only read about. The sickening yaw began to subside. The plane started to stabilize. "Get on the radio," she ordered, her eyes never leaving the instruments. "Declare an emergency. Tell them we have an engine failure and a medical situation. Divert us to Nellis. It's the closest runway long enough for this kind of landing." Mark fumbled for the microphone, his hands shaking. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," he stammered. We have an engine 1 failure and our captain is incapacitated. We are declaring an emergency and requesting immediate diversion to—" A calm voice from air traffic control came back instantly. "Global 451, roger your mayday. Turn left heading 290. Descend and maintain 10,000 feet. Squawk 7,700. Emergency services will be standing by." As Mark relayed the instructions, the sky off their right wing was suddenly filled by 2 sleek, gray shapes, F-35 Lightning IIs, appearing as if from nowhere, sliding into a close escort position. The lead fighter was so close they could clearly see the pilot in the cockpit, her helmeted head turning toward them. The radio crackled again, this time on the emergency guard frequency. It was a woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Global 451, this is Havoc 1. We're on your wing. How can we assist?" "Havoc 1, this is Global 451, Mark responded, his voice still shaky. "We have an inexperienced pilot at the controls." Pauline shot him a look that could have melted steel. She reached across, took the microphone from his trembling hand and keyed the comm switch. Her voice was pure calm, the voice of command. "Havoc, this is the pilot of Global 451, she said. "I am not an airline-rated pilot, but I have time and type. I need you to be my eyes. Give me a damage assessment on Engine 1 and confirm gear status on my final approach." There was a pause. The F-35 pilot was likely confused by the calm, authoritative voice of the inexperienced woman who had just taken control of a crippled airliner. "Ma'am, can you state your qualifications?" The voice of Havoc 1 asked, a hint of suspicion creeping in. Pauline hesitated for a fraction of a second. It had been decades, a lifetime ago. But in a crisis you fall back on your training, on who you are. "I have no current qualifications to be in this seat," she said evenly. "But I have a few thousand hours in everything from a T-38 to a YF-23. My old call sign was Widow 6. Silence, not for a second or two, but for a full 5 seconds, an eternity in aviation. Mark looked from the radio to Pauline, utterly bewildered. "Widow 6, what is that?" Before she could answer, the radio exploded. It wasn't the voice of Havoc 1. It was a male voice, deeper, from the other F-35. "Say again, Global Air. Did you say Widow 6? "Affirmative," Pauline replied. Another longer silence. Then Havoc 1 came back on, and her voice was completely different. The professional crispness was still there, but it was now layered with something else: shock, awe, and a profound, unwavering respect. "Widow 6, the pilot said, her voice catching slightly. "This is Major Jessica Viper Evans." "Ma'am, holy cow, stand by one." Inside the command post at Nellis Air Force Base, the emergency alert had already sent a jolt through the operations floor. A civilian airliner in distress diverting to their field was a major event. The wing commander, a stern-faced colonel named Davies, was already overseeing the response. "Get me a line to the cockpit," he ordered. "Who are we talking to?" "The first officer, sir," an airman replied. "But he sounds panicked," said an inexperienced pilot is flying the plane. "But then, sir, you need to hear this." He patched the comms through the main speaker. They all heard Major Evans's stunned voice. "Widow 6, holy cow." An older master sergeant in the corner of the room, a man who had been maintaining aircraft since the Cold War, looked up from his console, his eyes wide. "Sir," he said, his voice hushed. "There's only one Widow 6. "Who?" Davies snapped. "It's a legend, sir. A ghost story we tell the new pilots." "I don't have time for ghost stories, Master Sergeant." "Sir, run the call sign," the sergeant insisted. A young lieutenant, her fingers flying across a keyboard, pulled up a legacy database of retired and inactive call signs. She typed WIDOWSIX. The system churned for a moment, then a single file appeared on the screen. The room fell silent as they read. "Colonel Pauline Sanders, USAF, retired." A cascade of information scrolled across the screen. "Graduate, USAF Test Pilot School, class of 1988. First woman to fly multiple experimental black projects. Logged over 4,000 hours in 50 different aircraft types. Citations for Valor, including one for landing a crippled YF-12 prototype after a catastrophic engine explosion over Groom Lake. Another for nursing a damaged F-117 Nighthawk back to base during Desert Storm after its control systems were hit by shrapnel. She had been a pioneer, a trailblazer who had operated in the shadows, her career shrouded in the secrecy of advanced aviation development. She had retired almost 20 years ago. The file photo showed a much younger woman with the same piercing eyes, a confident smile on her face, standing in front of a futuristic matte black aircraft. Colonel Davies stared at the screen, his mind reeling. The inexperienced pilot was Pauline Widow 6 Sanders. One of the finest aviators their service had ever produced was in the cockpit of that dying airliner. "Major Evans," Davies's voice boomed over the command channel to the F-35's. "Your new mission is to provide whatever assistance Colonel Sanders requires. Get her on the ground safely. That is your only priority. Relay any and all requests she has directly to me. Treat her as the ranking officer in that sky. Do you understand?" "Crystal clear, sir," Viper replied, her voice filled with a newfound intensity. "Understood. Widow 6 is in command." Back in the cockpit of Global Air 451, Mark was staring at Pauline as if she had just sprouted wings. "Colonel," he whispered, the word foreign and unbelievable on his tongue. Pauline ignored him. She was focused, her mind a cold, clear machine processing 1,000 points of data. The plane was stable, but it was still a wounded bird. Landing it would require every ounce of skill she possessed. The radio crackled again. It was Major Evans. "Widow 6, Havoc 1. We're with you. The base is yours. Colonel Davies is on the horn and says to give you anything you need. Your port engine is showing no signs of fire, but it's dead weight. You're trailing a little hydraulic fluid, but it doesn't look critical. How do you want to play this?" This was the moment of truth. The modern Airbus cockpit was a world away from the analog gauges and direct link controls of the aircraft she had mastered. This was a flying computer, and she didn't speak its native language. "Viper," Pauline said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the still blaring alarms she hadn't silenced. "I'm a steam gauge pilot in a glass cockpit world. I've got the feel for the airframe, but I need you to talk me through your fly-by-wire systems. I can't get the landing configuration set." Mark, finally jolted out of his stupor, reached for the controls. "I can do that," he said, his voice cracking. "I can set the flaps and—" "No," Pauline cut him off, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You are my co-pilot now. You will do exactly what I say when I say it. Your job is to monitor the systems I can't, and back me up on my calls. Are we clear, First Officer?" Yes, ma'am," he stammered, shrinking back in his seat. The arrogant young pilot was gone, replaced by a humbled, terrified subordinate. What followed was an extraordinary dialogue, a conversation across generations of aviation, broadcast by mistake over the cabin's public address system. The terrified passengers who had been bracing for the worst fell silent, listening in rapt fascination. "Okay, Widow 6, Viper's voice said. clear and steady from their speakers. The flap lever is to your right. It's a detent system. Push it forward 1 click for flaps 1. Pauline's hand found the lever. Flaps 1, she confirmed, as the plane shuddered slightly and a new indicator lit up. Airspeed is bleeding faster than I'd like. This thing flies like a brick with the gear down. A chuckle came over the radio from the other F-35 pilot. She's not wrong, Viper. Watch your speed, ma'am, Viper continued. The A321 gets a little mushy on final. Keep it above 140 knots until you're over the threshold. 140, Pauline repeated. Feels fast for a landing. It is, ma'am, Viper said. She's heavy. ATC, be advised, the pilot of Global 451 is Colonel Pauline Sanders. She was a test pilot on the Hayave Blue program. She literally wrote the first chapter on flying unstable stealth airframes. A ripple of murmurs went through the cabin. People were looking at the cockpit door, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning wonder. The name meant nothing to them, but the respect in the fighter pilot's voice was unmistakable. Gear down, Pauline commanded. Mark, his hands now steady, reached over and lowered the landing gear lever. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel. 3 green, he reported, his voice now crisp and professional. He was a co-pilot again. Viper, confirm my gear, Pauline requested. All 3 are down and locked, Widow 6, came the immediate reply. You look good. The runway is 10 miles ahead. You're lined up perfectly. For the next 10 minutes, the 2 women worked together, a master from a bygone era and a Top Gun from the modern age, guiding the crippled jetliner toward the long, black ribbon of asphalt in the Nevada desert. Pauline flew by instinct, by the seat of her pants, her hands and feet making a million tiny adjustments. Viper acted as her system's interface, her calm voice translating the digital world of the Airbus into concepts Pauline could understand and act upon. 2 miles out, ma'am. You're a little high. I know, Pauline said. I'm keeping the energy up. Don't want to stall it this close to the dirt. Mark, full flaps. Full flaps, he confirmed. The ground rushed up to meet them. The runway lights were a beautiful, welcoming sight. 100 feet, Viper's voice called out. 50, 20, you're in the flare. Easy now. The rear wheels touched the tarmac. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a firm, solid arrival, a controlled crash. The plane bucked, and a groan of stressed metal echoed through the cabin, but the tires held. Pauline used the rudder and reverse thrust on the one good engine to keep the massive aircraft straight down the center line. The plane slowed, and finally, blessedly, rolled to a stop. For a moment there was absolute silence, both in the cockpit and in the cabin. Then the cabin erupted in cheers, applause, and relieved sobs. In the cockpit, Pauline let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 30 years. Her hands were trembling slightly as she rested them in her lap. She had done it. Mark was just staring at her, his eyes full of a gratitude and awe so profound it was almost painful to see. How? The radio crackled one last time. It was Major Evans. Widow 6, she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. That was the finest piece of flying I have ever seen. Welcome home, ma'am. The F-35s tipped their wings in a final graceful salute and peeled away, ascending back into the deep blue sky they commanded. When the emergency stairs were finally connected to the aircraft, the first person up was not a paramedic or an FBI agent. It was the wing commander, Colonel Davies. He stepped into the cockpit, his eyes immediately finding Pauline. He didn't see an old woman in a bright red jacket. He saw the pilot in the file, the legend. He snapped to attention, his hand coming up in a crisp, perfect salute. Colonel Sanders, he said, his voice booming with respect. On behalf of the United States Air Force, thank you. You have saved 132 lives today. Pauline simply nodded, too tired to speak. As she was helped down the stairs, the passengers were all there, lining the tarmac, their phones forgotten. They were just watching her, their faces filled with awe. They applauded as she passed, a wave of heartfelt gratitude. They knew they were in the presence of a hero. Davies turned to a pale and shaken Mark. First Officer Jensen, he said, his voice turning to ice. You had a living legend in seat 12B, a woman who forgot more about flying under pressure than you will ever learn, and you dismissed her. You failed to recognize competence because it came in a package you didn't expect. Your airline will be conducting an investigation, but so will we. We're going to use this as a lesson for every pilot on this base about bias and about what true courage and professionalism look like. As Pauline stood on the tarmac, the setting sun glinting off her silver hair, she looked at her hands. They were old hands, but they still knew the language of the sky. She felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. The world had changed, the machines had changed, but the fundamentals had not. Looking at the massive damaged jet, she remembered a moment, decades earlier, that had defined her. It was the flight that had earned her the name Widow 6. She had been in a top-secret experimental aircraft, a machine that was more theory than proven engineering, a complete electrical failure at 60,000 feet, plunging her into darkness and silence. She had no instruments, no radio, just her wits and a deep, intimate understanding of aerodynamics. She had wrestled that dead machine through the sound barrier, restarting the systems with a manual bus tie that was supposed to be impossible, and landed it on a dry lake bed with nothing but moonlight to guide her. She had survived what should have been unsurvivable. She had made a widow of the sky that day. A young female airman, no older than 20, approached her timidly, holding out a bottle of water. "Ma'am," she said, her voice filled with reverence. "Is it true what they're saying, that you flew the Nighthawk?" Pauline took the water and gave the young woman a small, weary smile. "The aircraft doesn't care if you're a man or a woman, or if you're 25 or 75, she said, her voice soft but clear. "It only responds to your hands, your knowledge, and your nerve. Gray hair doesn't mean you're obsolete. It just means you've survived the flights that broke younger pilots." Weeks later, the incident had become a media sensation. The airline, after a thorough investigation, fired Mark Jensen not for his handling of the emergency, but for his blatant disregard for crew resource management and his biased treatment of a passenger offering credible assistance. The FAA launched a new initiative to incorporate lessons on age and gender bias into pilot training, unofficially dubbing it the Sanders Rule. Pauline found a measure of quiet fame she had never sought. One afternoon, she was visiting the Aviation Museum off base, looking at a display for the SR-71 Blackbird, an aircraft she had always admired. "Colonel Sanders?" She turned. It was Mark Jensen. He was out of uniform, looking humbled and lost. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I was arrogant. I was scared. And I was wrong. You were right about everything, and I was too proud and too stupid to see it. I'm sorry." Pauline looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a cocky kid. She saw a young pilot who had faced his own limitations and been shattered by them. "We all make mistakes, Mark," she said gently. "The important thing is to learn from them. The most dangerous thing in a cockpit isn't a mechanical failure. It's an ego that won't ask for help. You let your idea of what a pilot should look like almost kill us all." He finally looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm not flying anymore. I don't think I can." "Don't let one failure define you," Pauline advised, her gaze turning back to the sleek black spy plane. "Let it teach you. The best pilots aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who survive them, learn from them, and become better. Go back to your training. Start from the beginning. Learn humility. It will make you a better pilot than you ever were before." She patted his arm, a simple grandmotherly gesture that was also a transfer of wisdom, and walked away, leaving him standing in the shadow of the giants of aviation, with a second chance he hadn't known he had. She had one more sky to conquer, the quiet, peaceful sky of a well-earned retirement. For more stories of incredible women who answered the call to serve, like and subscribe to She Chose Valor. Share this story to honor the veterans who continue to protect us, both in and out of uniform.